Both my parents are Holocaust survivors, and we have a very special family story. My dad got saved in a selection line facing death in a Jewish ghetto in Poland when he was 12 years old. And the only way he was going to survive is if someone pretended that he was their son. But it was very risky. And after asking many, many people in line that said no, he came across a woman right before he was going to get sent to the line to die that looked at him and said, if they're going to let me live with 2 young girls, they'll let me live with 3. Hold my hand. And in 1947, he was trying to get into Israel. And he couldn't get into Israel, but he got sponsored by a distant relative to come to Brooklyn, New York. Now he's 23 years old, and he goes to a wedding, and he's sitting at this wedding table, and there's a girl at the table telling everybody a story about friends of hers from Hartford, Connecticut, that saved a little boy from our town in a selection line. And he's sitting at this table and he cries out, I'm that boy, where are these people? And the next week, he comes up to Hartford to meet the nurse that saved his life and ends up marrying my mother, who was the 7-year-old girl in that selection line. There's hundreds and thousands of stories like that. And those stories need to be told, and they need to be heard for the generations to come.
The name Voices of Hope is the voices of the 2nd and 3rd generation survivors that are going to be heard to tell the story of their family's survival to future generations. We want to give it hope that the future generations will be affected in a very positive way by these stories, so that, again, we don't make the same mistakes that were made in the past.
The mission of Voices of Hope is that the importance and the need to be sure that future generations, my children, my children's children, have the opportunity to hear a voice of a survivor. I fear that my children may not remember meeting a survivor, or may not have the opportunity to meet a survivor, and it is important that groups and organizations such as Voices of Hope exist so that we can then take a survivor's voice and tell their story.
The stories are important to be told because there are too many places and people in the world that will deny that this atrocity ever happened. So this first-hand testimony is extremely important in letting the current and future generations know that this was a real event that happened, and these first-hand accounts are very important to be told.
Voices of Hope for 2nd and 3rd generation survivors gives us a feeling that we're not going to be forgotten, that our history isn't forgotten, and it also gives us a comfort knowing that in the future people will remember and memorialize those who perished.
Sharing stories, whether you're a survivor or whether you're a child or grandchild of a survivor, benefits the community because it makes the genocide that happened during the Shoah real, and you're seeing a name, a face, a human being who suffered just because they were Jewish. And it helps the community to understand that genocide is bad and that there are things going on in the world around them now that they can have a role in stopping, not just stopping, but just noticing. And by noticing and speaking up, try to stop the vicious cycle.
We try to go into every other agency that's out there and really give the message of the Holocaust and the survivors in the 2nd and 3rd generation. And hopefully people who aren't survivors and aren't connected firsthand to the Holocaust, they need to know the story and need to be able to tell it as well. Because it could happen again, and it happens again in other countries. And for people to have gone through the experience that they went through, and for that just to get lost is a message that's not right. It's not fair to the survivors, it's not fair to those who didn't survive, and it's certainly not fair to the future generations who won't know their story.
I think Voices of Hope is an an amazing organization of volunteers, second and third generation survivors and their children that care deeply, that's in our DNA, that we know we have an obligation to help eradicate genocide in all forms, in all over the world.
I feel very lucky to be here because my parents survived. I think it's an honor to my family to be able to carry on and tell the story of what happened to them for everybody to know. I think it's important for everybody to know.